The shadow of Kizuki's death and Naoko's breakdown. It was a rainy night, steady drops tapping against the windows as Watanabe and Naoko sat across from each other in a small, dimly lit bar. It was her birthday, a day she would have otherwise spent alone, lost in memories she barely shared. The rain blurred the view outside, cloaking the city in a quiet, muffled darkness. They had been sitting in silence, as they often did, both absorbed in thoughts they left unspoken. But that night, something was different. A heaviness hung between them, and as the hours passed, Naoko finally broke the silence. With a faint tremor in her voice, she began to speak, her words hesitant, as if pulling each one from a place buried deep within her. She spoke of Kizuki, the lingering pain of his absence, and the deep sense of regret that gnawed at her. Watanabe listened in silence, feeling the weight of each word she let fall. It was clear that Kizuki's suicide had left her in pieces, had shattered something fundamental within her, leaving her unable to find her way back to peace. Her voice wavered, carrying a delicate vulnerability that struck Watanabe like a physical blow. Beneath the surface of her carefully maintained composure, there was a fragility that he'd sensed before but had never fully understood until now. As the night wore on, and as the wine and conversation left them both raw and open, they found themselves back at Watanabe's apartment. There, in the muted glow of the city lights filtering through the window, they held each other, seeking comfort in their shared loneliness, their shared grief. There was something almost inevitable in the way they came together, as if the weight of their individual sorrows had driven them to this moment. Under the cover of night and the haze of alcohol, their pains seemed to merge, filling the space between them with a rare sense of intimacy. In each other's arms, they found a fleeting sense of warmth that, for that brief moment, felt like solace. But by morning, the tenderness had faded, replaced by a raw awareness of what had happened. Naoko seemed distant, her face pale, her expression clouded with regret. As the first light crept through the window, Watanabe could sense her withdrawing, pulling herself back behind an impenetrable wall. Her gaze was distant, as if she were somewhere he could never reach. He tried to reach out, to reassure her, but she gently pulled away. Her eyes held a coldness, an impenetrable distance that made it clear she was already somewhere else. Resolved to leave the intimacy of the previous night behind, there was nothing he could say to hold her back. Without a word, she left, slipping out of his apartment and out of his reach. Days later, Watanabe received a letter from Naoko. The handwriting was hasty, as if she had struggled to get the words out, each line filled with a quiet exhaustion that was as tangible as the ink on the paper. She wrote of her decision to check into a remote sanatorium, a place where she could face the chaos within her mind. She apologized for leaving so suddenly, explaining that her thoughts had become too heavy to carry alone, and that she feared losing herself completely. Her words carried a weight that Watanabe could feel deeply, each line revealing the depth of her suffering. Kizuki's death, she wrote, was a wound that she could never seem to close. It was as though a nail had been driven into her heart, binding her forever to a grief that refused to heal. It was an inescapable part of her, something she could neither erase nor escape, and it left her drifting between regret and hopelessness. She couldn't move forward, couldn't find peace in his absence. The sanatorium, she explained, was her last hope, a place where she might finally find the stillness she so desperately craved. Watanabe read the letter over and over, struggling to grasp the enormity of Naoko's suffering. He knew that Kizuki's death had left a wound in him as well, but seeing the extent to which it had consumed Naoko broke something within him. He felt a mixture of guilt and helplessness, questioning whether he had done enough to help her, whether he had truly been there for her as she had needed him to be. The image of Naoko's fragile face haunted him, along with the knowledge that he could do nothing to save her from the darkness that had overtaken her. In her final lines, Naoko asked him to remember her, to hold on to the memory of the girl she had once been, even as she fought to reclaim herself. Watanabe knew then that the shadow of Kizuki's death would forever bind them, a weight they would each carry in their own way. For Naoko, it was an unbearable burden that threatened to consume her. For Watanabe, it became a reminder of the fragility of the people he cared for and the limits of his ability to protect them. The letter lay heavy in his hands, a testament to the sorrow that connected them, even as it threatened to pull them apart.